Good afternoon. Good morning, we're back. It appears the thunderstorm has subsided a bit, so we will continue. We won't be very long, so we should continue. Thank you very much, of course, joining again. This is Servant Leader Speaks, as we continue talking about the Constitution and whether this is a real place. This is a real place. We will, for the sake of those just joining us, not just start again, but begin talking about where we left off. We were talking about the Constitution and what is the status of the Constitution, or what is the status of the Bahamas regarding the Constitution. This is God's country, I would put it like that. Of course, we got constitutional monarchy from the British, but as we go into the second part of this teaching today, we will talk about this being God's country. But let's go back to the matter of the Bahamas being a constitutional monarchy. And I will go ahead and redefine that as we did earlier. Many persons have asked the question, do we have full independence from Britain? Or are we just an autonomous form of internal self-governance? I asked Sir Lyndon about that. The 2 years before he passed, he was my mentor, and he gave me some answers in regards to this. In 1998, the Lord had spoken to me about the Bahamas, and he instructed me to go to Sir Lyndon Pindang and exact from him not only the original intent of the Constitution, or the original intent of the Constitution, the preamble of the Constitution, but I thought, as I did my studies, to ask more questions in regards to how we go forward. Now, the constitutional monarchy, and if I may, is described as a form of democratic government in which a monarch acts as a non-party political head of state within the boundaries of a constitution, whether it's written or unwritten. While the monarch may not hold formal reserve power, the government may take place in the monarch's name. They do not set public policy or choose political leaders. In fact, one political scientist has defined a constitutional monarchy as a sovereign who reigns but does not rule. This form of government does differ from absolute monarchy, in which monarchs control political decision-making and is not effectively restricted by a constitutional restraint. Now, constitutional monarchies are sometimes referred to as limited monarchies, crowned republics, or parliamentary monarchies. The United Kingdom and 15 of its former colonies are constitutional monarchies with a Westminster system of governance. That means the Bahamas. We are one of those former colonies. So we are effectively a constitutional monarchy or parliamentary democracy. Another British political theorist also described the political rights of a constitutional monarchy as the right to be consulted, that is the monarch, the right to be consulted, the right to be advised, and the right to be warned. Let us talk quickly in regards to let's go back to the Constitution as we read earlier, but we want to make sure for those joining us to be a part of this. The first chapter of the Constitution says, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas shall be a sovereign democratic state. The Constitution is the supreme law of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and subject to the provisions of this Constitution. If any other law is inconsistent with this Constitution shall prevail, and the other law, to the extent of the inconsistency, shall be void. The chapter 5 of the Constitution, which is on page 34 for those of you who may have your Constitution, this is the composition of the Parliament. Chapter 5 and Article 38. There shall be a Parliament of the Bahamas, which shall consist of a Majesty, a Senate, and a House of Assembly. There are three parts of this constitutional monarchy we call the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. On Article 71, and it is on page 51 for those of you looking in, the executive authority of the Bahamas is vested in Her Majesty. And subject to the provision of this Constitution, the executive authority of the Bahamas may be exercised on behalf of Her Majesty by the Governor General, either directly or through officers subordinate to him. Article 72 says there shall be a cabinet of the Bahamas, which shall have the general direction and control of the government of the Bahamas. The cabinet shall consist of the Prime Minister and 8 ministers, no less than 8 ministers, and they shall be appointed by the Governor General. So the Prime Minister is appointed by the Governor General, and of course the members, the Prime Minister is the person or the member of the Parliament who is the leader or commands the majority of the persons or members of that house. That is the person who would be appointed Prime Minister. And of course, the leader of the opposition, which is also a part of Her Majesty's government, is a person appointed who commands respect of the majority of those in opposition to the government in regards to becoming the leader of the opposition. Just as a side, if we look at 74, looking at all of the issues and people calling at this time for the resignation of the Prime Minister or the government, Article 74 says that if the House of Assembly, and I'm going to paraphrase, because I just want to make one point in that regard, that if the Parliament of the Bahamas passes a resolution supported by the majority of all members of the House declaring that there is no confidence in the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister does not, within 7 days of the passing of such a resolution, either resign or advise the Governor General to dissolve the Parliament, the Governor General shall revoke the appointment of the Prime Minister. So if it comes to a point of there being a no confidence vote in the Prime Minister, as being said now, based on all of the revelations that are being brought forward in the Brent Simonette resignation, if that motion for no confidence is passed in regards to the Prime Minister, he has to revoke, he has to either dissolve Parliament, ask the Governor to dissolve Parliament, or he should resign within 7 days. If he does none of those, the Governor General has a right to revoke the appointment and appoint someone else or dissolve Parliament for a new general election. That is part of what I wanted just to touch base really on the matter of the Constitution. I am going to teach on this a little bit more a little later. It's to a great extent in my book, How to Reconstruct a Nation, so we will talk about that a little more. I think earlier I began to say that when we talk about us just being a constitutional monarchy and whether we have full independence, I remember asking Sir Lyndon whether why didn't they go any further? His response to me was that because they had the franchise, they had already had the franchise to govern the Bahamian people, they were able to begin the College of the Bahamas, the central bank, they were able to form and put legislation for the defense force. They were satisfied that that was as far as they can go. But we are satisfied that that was 46 years ago. And 46 years ago, we've come almost more than one full generation. So those in this new Bahamas, or at this time, will have a right or an opportunity to make changes to the Constitution. There's something that people do not know in regards to changes in the Constitution. If Her Majesty's Privy Council, as we know, as I read earlier in the Constitution, was responsible for giving the Bahamas independence, in that those persons who were members were also part of the Parliament of the United Kingdom. So they were part of that. So if we appoint a QC or a member of the Privy Council in regards to constitutional reform, be certain we're not going to get any recommendations to remove Her Majesty as head of state. Those persons who are Queen's Counsel or part of the Privy Council will always vote or make plans not to remove Her Majesty as the head of state. And so that's where it will continue. So we, in order for the Bahamas to consider going to constitutional democracy or any other type of government, they will have to do so with independent thinking persons or persons who believe it is necessary to go to constitutional democracy. For those persons, and just as a side also, if we were to move out of constitutional monarchy to constitutional democracy, even with a republic style of governance or another kind of governance, persons wanting to continue in the Commonwealth can join the Commonwealth again as an independent republic. And I think that has been done in terms of Trinidad and Tobago. I know Jamaica is now campaigning also to go to a full independent state. But let me share with you just a little bit as we look towards the 46th anniversary of independence, not only the fact of us being a constitutional monarchy or parliamentary democracy, but what are we? The question was asked earlier, is this a real place? Oh, it sure is a real place. And I want to share with you some vision and some revelation in regards to this being a real place and this being God's country. In 1998, which is 21 years ago, I had a vision. The Lord invited me to go to Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States of America. And at the American University, when I did, he spoke to me 3 instructions: run 39 candidates under the banner of the Bahamas Constitution Party, ask Christian men and women to make themselves available to serve, and go to Sir Lyndon and exact from him the original intent of the preamble of the Constitution. I was a little concerned about that, but while I was thinking and meditating on that, he gave me more revelation over the time period. The Lord said to me that in the early 1900s, 1930s, 1940s, into the 1950s, the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas cried unto him that if he gave them their land and make them a free people in the land of their birth, they will give the nation to him as a Christian nation and the next generation as a pledge. That was the cry, the prayer made by the Bahamian people unto God. So what was the founder's intent when we look at what it is to be a Christian nation? What does that mean? What does it look like when you are talking about what is a Christian nation? Well, let's read really quickly the preamble of the Constitution. And one thing that is very strong with me is in that revelation about God talking about what the Bahamian people had prayed. He said this preamble is a contract between him and his people. And so this contract, which is very minimal based on what the colonial office has decided to give us, this is the contract regarding what a Christian nation should look like. Let me read the preamble of the Constitution. We're going to talk about what that means in layman terms, and then we're going to be finished. The Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, the preamble. And whereas 481 years ago, the rediscovery of this family of islands, rocks, and keys heralded the rebirth of the New World. And whereas the people of this family of islands, recognizing that the preservation of their freedom will be guaranteed by a national commitment to self-discipline, industry, loyalty, unity, and an abiding respect for Christian values and the rule of law. Now know ye therefore that we, the inheritors of and successors to this family islands, recognizing the supremacy of God and believing in the fundamental rights and freedom of the individual, do hereby proclaim in solemn praise the establishment of a free, democratic, sovereign nation founded on spiritual values in which no man, woman, or child shall ever be slave or bondsman to anyone, or their labor exploited, or their lives frustrated by deprivation, and do hereby provide by these articles for the indivisible unity and creation under God of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. What does it mean to be a Christian nation? First, we must operate in the fear of God. Men and women who are leading the people must operate in the fear of God and with the fear of God. We must operate in a just and fair manner. We must be our brother's keeper. We must treat the poor with respect and the elderly with dignity. We must respect people's rights and their space. We must develop the nation. That's important. We must make wealth common. We must alleviate poverty and injustice. We must deal swiftly with wrongdoing. We are to be industrious with all diligence to develop programs to feed ourselves, both farming, both fishing, and anything that creates opportunity for the Bahamian people. There are a lot of natural resources here in which we can use to create wealth for the Bahamian people. Bahamian children should not be going to bed hungry when there is an abundance of wealth in the country. We have just discovered that there is a kind of mud outside on the western side of Andros that actually can make joint compound. This is a new industry. In addition to that, our deputy leaders found out that there is an orchid, you know that beautiful flower, an orchid industry that can be related from in the backside of Andros. We also know that coconuts are abundant. We can use the coconut not only to produce oil, which is we should not be importing coconut water whilst we have coconuts here to make. Let me get back to my list. We're talking about what a Christian nation should be about. Some people just think we're talking about going to church. Now that is our heritage, but there is more than that. The government must use the natural resources to help all the people and not a selective few. In a Christian nation, judgment must run down like water and righteousness as a mighty stream. Now we get to the word righteous. People get scared when they hear that word righteous. What does that mean? But righteousness is doing the right thing. Justice and fair play must be done in a Christian nation. The righteousness is doing it right, for the right reason, for the right people. We're talking about righteousness. It is about spreading opportunities for all people. I talked about it with the natural resources. We can't give one person 5 contracts and the other person no contract. That stays right there. We are not righteous when we're going to do that. We must make sure that the funds that is invested for stimulus in the nation must go across the board. I think about this. If we have to make a decision, if we have 1,000 children on lunch program in the school, and we have to make a decision to cut that budget in half, who are going to be the 500 children that we take off? Think about it. What do you decide? You decide we take off 500 children? Or you decide, when we're talking about righteousness, what we must do is we can at least use the budget, stretch the food, make sure all of those 1,000 children eat. So even though we have to cut the budget, even if we got to invite people to bring food in order to help, we cannot cut 500 children off the food program. We have to make sure all of them eat, because for some of those children, as I have seen in my moving about in this country, that many of those children who are on food programs, it is the only meal that they have every day. So we have to make sure that in our righteous judgment, in our righteous mandates, what we do is that if we have to spread it, we must spread it. Besides, when we think about all of the natural resources that have been exploited by a very few in this country, and children are still going to bed hungry, that indicates right there that we have not operated righteous governance for a long time in this country. Also, righteousness is about protecting the sovereignty of the nation and the Christian heritage. The Christian heritage, we are a Christian nation. People believe in God, they go to church, they have Christian values. That's what the preamble say, Christian values and the rule of law. A Christian government or a righteous governance, a righteous government must protect that Christian heritage. When we look at the Constitution and the preamble, which sets the spirit and the tone of the Constitution, it says that we must protect the fundamental rights. You have a right to be a Christian. You have the right to decide that you don't want to be a Christian. You have a right to be an atheist. You have a right to be whatever you want. Only in a Christian nation can you have the right of freedom of religion. Because in Muslim nation, in Islamic nation, they would kill you if you decide to do otherwise. We've seen it. We've seen the persecution of Christian people around the world. So we are talking about this nation This nation that brings about, that indicate by the preamble of the Constitution, it's supposed to be a Christian nation, abiding respect for the rule of law. There has to be the level of transparency and accountability in everything we do. It doesn't mean that we won't make mistakes, but it means that we cannot connive to do wickedness. We cannot connive together to do wrongdoing. We must do what is necessary in order to bring righteousness in the nation. And so for 21 years, I've talked about this, and now that we look, even now in the nation, there is a crisis of integrity, a crisis of corruption. This is the time. This is the place that we look at this preamble of the Constitution, that we look at an agenda for righteousness in the nation, that those people who lead us, those people who govern, must do so with the fear of God, with an abiding respect for Christian values and the rule of law. I hear you, Antoinette Roll. It is quite correct. We must have transparency how we're dealing with our children. I've been in youth work for many years, and during that time, we were always very integrous. In fact, when we had Hope House on Marathon Road, we had no doors. There were no doors. So there could be nothing happening within an office that we do not know. And it's important that throughout the activities of young people, throughout the activities within the country, we must bring transparency, accountability. We're going to talk about this a little more as we get into even the teaching for the book. But as we go into our 46th anniversary of independence, we must remember that the founders of the nation intended to create a nation where we can serve the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas with transparency, with integrity, without doing your business before the people's business. The people's business must take precedence. We cannot just do our own thing. We must do the people's business. And so we call on everyone who is doing what is not right to cease from what you're doing. And if you can't handle the business of governance without crookery, without cheating, without wrongdoing, then let somebody else do it who can do it. And I believe that there is a people in this country, there are men and women of integrity who have been living and serving in this country, probably in churches, teachers, even outside of the country. We have a lot of Bahamians outside of the country serving other people, serving other nations, building other nations. We need them to help develop this nation. So the time is going to come, and not so sure, that this administration, and I'm just going to say this in closing, is going to have to make a decision regarding what they do, what they're going to do with the nation. If they think that if they resign today, that nobody's going to be able to govern the country, they have another thing. They're sadly mistaken. That's the word. They're sadly mistaken. Because I believe that God has called forward men and women who can do the work. They may be simple and they may be poor. They may not be rich. They may not be connected. But they can do the business of the nation as God intended. That we make certain that the rights and the freedom of the individuals are respected, that no slavery, and economic slavery isn't counted in that, no oppression is counted in that, happens to any Bahamian citizen or resident, that no labor is exploited. And it appears now that a lot of foreign element, as they come into the country and they are given a right to run their own hotel or whatever their business, they are taking advantage of the labor of Bahamians. This cannot happen in a righteous environment. We have to make sure that children do not go to bed hungry. Or if you are giving food to the hungry, have respect for the poor. The poor must be respected, not because they're poor, that's the only meal. Do you give them substandard food or food that is rotten? Don't do it for people. If you would not eat it, don't give it to nobody else. I'm just speaking generally on righteous governance, how we govern the nation, and that's not just in the House of Parliament, but that's in every industry that we work. We must have respect for people. And I feel very terrible that we do not have respect for the poor. And I'm sure I'm going off a message, but I believe it is important because we're talking about a righteous agenda for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And if you are out there, if you are listening, if you believe that you can do a better job than what is being done, give me a call, inbox me. Because we are preparing, and we will be prepared whenever the opportunity comes. We'll be prepared to govern this nation as God wants it. This is God's nation, and He wants it back. He does not want His people to be mistreated. He does not want contracts to go to one person and not everybody, because there is enough in this country for everybody to eat. This is the best place in the world, and everybody wants a part of it. And we live here. We are citizens. And it appears that we're the only people not getting the real benefit of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. That has to stop. And as we prepare going into this 46th anniversary of independence, I want to implore you, we must consider what it is that God wants for us, and we are to be prepared to do it. That includes the government and the people. Thank you so much for joining me. My phone is now going off, but I do want you to know that this is a wonderful place to live. It's a real place. It's God's place. So you should be proud to be a Bahamian. You should be proud to be a Bahamian. And we are going to do the best for our country going into the next next generation. We're going to do what we have to do to make certain that our children and the next generation. Blessings on you. Thank you very much. Very soon we will be coming back with another broadcast. So blessings on you. Have a good day.